Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all of you to this undergraduate online religious studies course, Comparative Religion. A course in which, not surprisingly given that title, we're going to be exploring, among other things, the ways in which the world's religions are alike and the ways in which they're different. My name, again, not surprisingly, since it's right there in front of you, is James Cutsinger. That last name, by the way, is German in origin. And believe it or not, if you trace it back far enough, it probably meant something like God singer. That is, somebody who sings to or sings about God in church. In other words, a chanter or a member of a choir. You'll be happy to know, trust me, that I'm not going to do any singing. But I will be talking a great deal about God and understandings of God and paths to God, ways of worshiping God. Before we start getting into all that, though, the first thing I need to tell you right here at the start of our course is that religion is really, really weird. Do you know the word contronym? That was a new one to me, actually, before I found the word a few years ago. A contronym is any word that is its own opposite. It's its own antonym. So it can mean, in other words, opposite things. So example here, the word cleave, C-L-E-A-V-E, cleave, can mean either cut in half. So, a meat cleaver is something you chop a steak in half with, split it apart. But it can also mean stick together and unite. So a man shall cleave to his wife, the traditional marriage service says. And that doesn't mean he should take a meat cleaver to her, obviously. It means they should be harmonious. They should be united together. Scan is a word like that too. It's a contronym. If I scan something, I can look at it very minutely, very carefully, word upon word, punctuation mark by punctuation mark. Maybe I'm proofreading something, you see. I scan it. But scan can also mean look through something really, really quickly. You scan the sports page. That just means that your eye, runs over it really fast to catch the top scores or something like that. Well, the point is, religion is in that category. Religion is a kind of contronym, or put it differently, it's a word that can serve as the correct answer to opposite questions. So here's what I've got in mind. What force in all human history has done the most to bring out the best in people, to help in building up human communities, to bring about peace? Question 1. Question 2, what force in all human history has done the most to bring out the worst in people, to destroy human communities, and to bring about war? There are excellent reasons for thinking that religion is the answer to both of those questions. It's sort of like, I was thinking about this, it's sort of like the beginning of Charles Dickens's novel, A Tale of Two Cities. You may remember from literature classes, the first sentence of A Tale of Two Cities is one of the longest sentences in history, I think. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It goes on and on. Well, I'm saying it's kind of like religion. Religion has resulted in the best of times, sometimes, and it's resulted in the worst of times, sometimes. And religious people have done things that are pretty wise, and religion and religious people have done things that are pretty stupid sometimes. Anyway, the point again is, religion is weird. Whatever it is appears to be shot through with ambiguity, with paradox. Another example of what I'm talking about. Take the reputed origins of religion. Where does religion come from? Well, some people would say religion is created by God, who also created man in his image and likeness. Many of you will be familiar with that kind of language from the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, the Bible. But other people would argue religion is created by man, who created God in his image and likeness. So who's right? And what sort of thing could be pictured so differently? It's weird. Or how about the question of its relative importance in people's lives? As you all know, religion is for some people the most important thing there is. It defines, it shapes, it affects everything that they think and that they feel and they do. For other people, religion is the last thing that they think of. And when they do give it some thought, it's only to disparage it, to trivialize it, to critique it as a regressive force, suited only, for people that haven't grown up. The pictures here, by the way, so on the left, we've got a little Amish family. I assume that for them, religion would be very, very significant, right? And on the right-hand side, we've got standing in the door of a London double-decker bus, Richard Dawkins, the famous or infamous British atheist, one of a group we call the New Atheists, who says God is simply a delusion and we ought to grow up and grow out of it. So very, very different estimates, obviously, of religion and what religion entails. Now, I realize you might try to answer these questions by saying, well, the ambiguity of religion is not really in religion itself. It's in the interpretations that religion is given by different sorts of people. And of course, that's partly true. But go back to the first weirdness I mentioned, the fact that religion is at once a force of love and a force for war. These images are designed to be emblematic of those two possibilities. So on the left, as you may recognize, we've got St. Francis of Assisi, famous saint of the Christian church, famed for his desire to find peace, his communication with animals, his love of all people, his self-sacrifice, his charity, etc., etc. And of course, on the right, again, a familiar countenance, we have Osama bin Laden, famous for not using religion in a very, very peaceful way at all. So opposites, obviously, when it comes to how they interpret religion. But it's not just their interpretation. Lots of you probably know already that the religion of Islam contains within its own Bible, the Quran, different verses within the text itself, some of which seem to advocate charity, and some of which seem to advocate violence. But if you ever stop to think about it, Christianity does that as well. On the one hand, the Bible says we're to love our neighbors as ourselves, which is pretty obviously a recipe for unity and harmony. Christ says that's the second commandment, in fact, after love of God. Love thy neighbor as thyself. But Christ also himself said, according to the Gospel of Matthew, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. And if you go on, he adds that whoever wishes to be his disciple must hate. That's the word he uses. You have to hate your mother, your father, your son, your daughter, even your own self, if you want to be his disciple. So, what's going on here? Now, mind you, I don't mean to suggest these apparent paradoxes can't be resolved. I think they can be. And the religions in question that we're talking about here at the moment, Islam and Christianity, within their interpretive traditions, within the traditions in those religions that go about trying to analyze and understand the meanings of Scripture, whether the Quran or the Bible, there's plenty of ammunition for people who want to say, yes, these can be harmonized. There's actually no conflict at a very deep level. Okay, and I agree with that. But at least on the surface, it's no accident that religion, Christian or otherwise, is often ambiguous. It often, again, go back to my word here, my contronym word, religion often serves as its own antonym. It often fuels works of extraordinary charity and self-sacrifice, but also works of extraordinary violence and cruelty. And we need to admit that, confess that, as it were, right at the start here. So our task is to try to understand this really strange thing. And in my opinion, in order to do that, it's helpful right at the start to make a distinction between the word religion and the word religions. So religion in the singular and religions in the plural. Let's start with the singular. What do we mean by religion? Well, one way to define that term would be to say that religion is the connection or relationship between a given human being, you or me or somebody else, or a group of human beings, the connection between them or that person and whatever he believes or whatever they believe to be the most important thing in life. That's religion. And as you can see on the slide, what I'm trying to show here is that etymologically speaking, our word religion actually comes from a Latin root. The prefix re means back, and the part of the word ligen comes from the Latin ligare, which is a verb meaning to bind or connect. So religion connects you back or reestablishes a relationship between you or your group. And again, what I'm saying here, the thing you regard as the most important in life, the essential in life. If you think about it, and we're going to say more about this momentarily, everybody's got a religion. Even Richard Dawkins, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, the atheist, the outspoken atheist propagandist, has a religion. Even the atheist has certain things or something that he regards as the most important thing in the universe. You don't have to be a practitioner of one of the religions in the plural to have a religion. That's all I'm trying to say at this point. Religion connects you, whoever you are, to what you think is the most important thing of all. Now, I wanted to point out at this juncture, there are different disciplines, different subject areas, different departments, if you want to put it that way, in the university, which explore religion, as I've defined it so far, religion in the singular, from a variety of perspectives or angles. So, for example, there is at USC, in my department, cross-listed with the psychology department, a course called The Psychology of Religion. And for the most part, that class explores religion as I've defined it so far. Whatever anybody assumes is the most important thing, that's their religion. Well, okay, let's talk about that psychologically. How does a person's religion affect the way she thinks and acts? Is there a correlation between religious beliefs and emotional maturity or intellectual development? To what extent can religion be explained on the basis of family background, education, IQ? At a physiological level, what's happening when a person has a religious experience in their brain, neurologically? Okay, all of those are questions explored by psychologists of religion in the singular. Or again, USC has a course called The Sociology of Religion. It's taught, in fact, by somebody in the sociology department, but cross-listed with religious studies again. Here, the angle of approach is from the point of view of society. And the questions that are raised and answers are attempted to be given are questions like, how do the religions of a given society affect the way that society is organized? Or turn it around, how does social organization in turn affect religion? Is there a correlation, some kind of comparison we can make between religious beliefs and a society's level of development, whether industrial or economic? Is there a way to measure the social impact of, now notice this, such religions as sports, music, the entertainment industry, and campaign politics? Now you see, here's an example of what I meant when I said everybody's got a religion, because everybody has something that is the most important thing for them. And sociologists, when they explore religion, stress that fact by treating things like sports and music and so on as religious convictions or religious beliefs or religions in some sort of way. They're obviously not what we usually think of when we think about religions in the plural, but they have this facet of being important to somebody or important to some particular group. You can also look at religion in the singular philosophically. And once again, USC has a course in the philosophy of religion in the philosophy department. Here these sorts of questions are asked. Now notice it's more normative now, not just what do people do, but should enters into the equation. What should a person believe, the philosopher asks, is the most important thing in life? For that matter, should we believe there is one single most important something? Or could it be that everyone's right, regardless of what he or she believes? This would be the position of a person we call a relativist. You see, there's no final absolute truth or reality. It's whatever you like, whatever you prefer. That's fine. Everybody's got a different something up there or out there or in there that they think is important, and there's no one right answer to the question of what is important. On the other hand, if everybody's belief isn't necessarily true, what are the ultimate consequences of believing the wrong thing, of mistaken belief? Or finally, can one go beyond belief itself and really know the truth? Know what is the capital T, most important, capital S, something? These are philosophical questions. Okay, well, maybe that's enough of religion in the singular. What do I mean by religions in the plural? Well, here's my definition in front of you. Specific sets of doctrines. Okay, doctrines are beliefs, teachings. We could use the metaphor maps of the universe, maps of reality, on the one hand, and specific sets of practices, things that you do, things you engage in light of your map, how you get to the places laid out on that map. Religions are specific sets of doctrines and practices that are intended to reconnect, here's that religare again, human beings to the supreme spiritual reality. Now, I use that kind of open-ended phrase, supreme spiritual reality. In the West, Jews, Christians, Muslims would simply call that reality God. But as we're going to be discovering as we move into the course, other religions, in the plural, don't personalize the ultimate reality in quite that same way. They don't use the word God. So I'm using that in a kind of open-ended way at the moment. Supreme spiritual reality as defined by the reality's own self-expression. Let's read that again. Religions are specific sets of doctrines and practices that are intended to reconnect human beings, not just what they think is the case, their own opinions, but rather to the supreme reality as defined by that reality, as defined by that reality's own revelation or self-expression or communication to man. Now you see we're in very different territory here. No more relativism is possible. It can no longer be whatever I think is important for me and you can't step on my toes. No, in the sphere of religions in the plural, we're now talking about a connection to something that really is supremely important, whether people know it or not, and they ought to know it. Okay, you see the difference here. Religions in the plural can also be explored, studied, investigated from different disciplinary points of view in the university or elsewhere. So you can explore religions in the plural historically. And a historian of religions is going to ask some questions like this. When and where did each of the world's major religions originate? What was the time period? What was the geographical context? What historical events are the most important in understanding how these religions have expanded, or in some cases shrunk over time, over the centuries? Are there parallels in their rates or forms of development, or have widely different historical, geographical environments resulted in different kinds of institutions among the religions and different uses of their sacred texts? Those are historical questions. Where do the religions come from? Have they gotten bigger or smaller in a given case? And then what about how they've developed over time and the institutions that resulted from those developments? Ways of looking at sacred texts like the Bible. Okay, that's historical stuff. You can explore religions in the plural theologically, from a theological point of view. And now we're really zeroing in more precisely on our class this term in comparative religion. We're going to be asking a lot of theological questions. For example, what are the essential doctrines of each of the world's major religions? What did they teach? What did they believe? What did they think? What do they teach about where we came from? What do they teach about why we're actually here on this planet? Where are we going to go when we die? How are these teachings related both within a given religion and to those of other religions? You see, here's where the comparison contrast comes in. What's the relationship, another theological question, between a religion's doctrines and its spiritual practices? So what it says about prayer and worship and fasting, meditation, maybe making pilgrimages to sacred sites. Those are practices. What's the relationship between all of that and what they teach, what they believe, their doctrines? Now, another question that one can ask, and I want to pose it right now and get you thinking about it, is the question of where we should go, you and me, in searching for an authority, someone who can speak with authority on behalf of the religions that we're going to be studying. Who speaks for a religion? To whom should we look for guidance in trying to understand specific doctrines and practices? Well, there are a couple of answers, two possible answers that different scholars would give to that question. Some people in religious studies like me, would answer that question with what I'm calling here a democratic, or you could call it a bottom-up approach. So the answer to the question, to whom should we go, is anybody who claims to follow a given religion has a right to speak on its behalf. Therefore, as I kind of joke here, Harry Hindu, Bonnie Buddhist, Johnny Jew, Chrissy Christian, and Mickey Muslim are all valid informants regarding the religions they practice. A person who takes this approach, who looks to just anyone practicing the religion for guidance as to what the religion teaches, is going to stress things like surveys, interviews, testimonials of Harry and Bonnie and Johnny and Chrissy and Mickey. Maybe they're going to make visits to local temples and churches and mosques and other places of worship to talk to just lay people, just folks, there in the pews, as we say. That's the bottom-up approach. That's the democratic answer to the question of where we go for guidance. At the other end of the spectrum, really a 180 from this, is what I'm calling on this slide an aristocratic or a top-down approach. Here, your answer is going to be, well, you ought to talk to sages. You ought to talk to saints. You ought to talk to people who have realized the full fruits of a given religion if you want to know truly and deeply and authoritatively what that religion is all about. And if that's your answer, you're going to be looking to gurus, prophets, apostles, other spiritual, if you want to call them spiritual experts, if you want to understand where the Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Taoists and Confucians are coming from. And in this case, the aristocratic approach is going to stress the importance of understanding the sacred scriptures, the other traditional sources. So, for example, in Christianity, it would be not simply the Bible, but what we call the church fathers, the apostolic fathers of the church, people in the early centuries who were closer to the beginning of Christianity. And we'd be reading about the lives and the teachings of the greatest spiritual masters and saints if we're going to give an aristocratic answer to the question of where we look for authority. Two very different approaches to that particular question. Okay, pull this together. One final slide and one final little bit of information today. This course, Religious Studies 120, Comparative Religion, as taught by me, your professor James Cutsinger, is going to be philosophical in its stress, theological, and aristocratic. Philosophical in its approach to religion, in the singular, not psychological, not sociological. So we're going to be asking and trying to answer some of the questions that I mentioned earlier that philosophers ask. So, for example, is there one and only one supreme truth? Or can you believe whatever you want to? We're going to be asking and attempting to answer, when it comes to religions in the plural, the theological questions that I mentioned about the origin of the world and life after death and so forth, not a historical survey of facts and dates and institutions and events. And when it comes to authorities, we're going to be, frankly and unapologetically, aristocratic. We're going to be looking at saints and sages and prophets and apostles and gurus and people like that have walked the full walk. They've in some way at least gone a lot further than the rest of us. And they can speak, it seems to me, much more authoritatively about what Hindus or Buddhists or Muslims believe. Let me finish up here with this little quotation that I've got on the slide from a friend of mine, actually, a man that I'm very blessed to call my friend, Huston Smith, who wrote a book many, many, many years ago called The Religions of Man. Huston is still on the planet, even as we speak. He's 97 years old. And this book, The Religions of Man, continues to be the most widely used and best-selling introductory course to world religions. And I've relied upon that in these lectures, and certainly relied on my friendship with Huston. Here's what he says, a good way to end for today. Religion confronts the individual, you and me, with the most momentous option this world can present. It calls the soul to the highest adventure it can undertake, a proposed journey across the jungles, peaks, and deserts of the human spirit. The call is to confront reality and, notice this, to master the self. Those who dare to hear and follow this secret call soon learn the dangers and difficulties of its lonely journey. Now, I might want to modify that last sentence a bit. I would say maybe learn the dangers and difficulties of a journey that is sometimes quite lonely and lonesome. But what? Also the beauties and the blessings and the wonders of a journey that we can also sometimes take in concert with others in community. Still, though, I like that quotation. Momentous, highest adventure, confronting reality, mastering the self. So that's what we're in for, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned.